an educational series on cybersecurity, compliance, and IT governance. Produced with the support of Freedom Technologies, Phoenix's leading managed service provider.
So without further ado, I am briefly going to share my screen because I found that picture that I wanted to share. And there's Casey. What conference is this? RSA?
This is Black Hat. Yeah, this is Black Hat.
Okay, great. Casey, take it away.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'll be on camera for a little bit just to say hi, and then I'll come off camera so you guys can focus a little bit. So we're going to talk a little bit about Python, why I learned Python, why maybe you should learn Python. And I'm going to show you a demo. I'm going to brave a live demo. For those people who do live demos, you'll know what I'm talking to. I've prayed to the demo gods. So we'll hopefully make this work. I'm going to show you a program that I built over the last 3 years that kind of really gave me the Python skills I was looking for. So let's jump in. I'll close my camera here so you can focus on that. Give me a second. And so you can you see my 0 to hero screen, John?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I have more than one screen, so I just wanted to make sure. So I call this my Python 0 to hero story, and you'll see why as we move along here. A little bit about me, if you haven't seen me do a talk at this gathering before. I'm a hobby hacker, and as John shared with you, I have an affinity for fitness, as well as hacking, as I said. So I have some experience in vulnerability management, networking, and systems. I've been in IT for 17 years. I've been in security for about 10. I have a few certs, if you care about certs. I'm most proud of the GPen coin that I won as a novice hacker. That's pretty cool. And Net Wars, if you've ever done Sans Net Wars, it is not easy. So I was lucky enough to be on a championship team and get that coin as well. So today, we're gonna go breeze through this. Is gonna be about half of me talking, about 25% of me talking, and then 75% of me actually showing you what I did here. So we're gonna talk about why I learned Python, a very short story about my 0 to hero Python story, the need for a project to level up. Then we're going to get into my command line program called Navi. If you are a Zelda fan, you'll know where that name comes from. We're going to talk a little bit about what's under the hood, what makes Navi work. We're going to talk about how to install Navi, some general capabilities, and then finally we'll get into a demo. I'll start to close with the career impact Python has given me, and then the relevance of Python in cyber, as well as maybe why open up a GitHub account. Now, this looks like a very long agenda. Trust me, I'm going to spend maybe a minute or two in each slide. This will go relatively quick, but I think it's important. I do some mentoring at Tenable and outside of Tenable, and one of the questions that I get often is, what skills should I learn to get into cyber? And so Python is becoming one of those top skills that I think is important, depending on where you see yourself in cyber. Cyber is growing. So let me tell you why I learned Python. Like I said on the front end, I'm a hobby hacker. I've been a hobby hacker since I can remember, since about 11. And most people who are in this realm that would call themselves a hobby hacker or something other that's like this, they probably have done it since they can remember. The second thing is people are paying a lot of money for Python skills. And so, of course, like anyone else, earning more money is always a good thing. I have a very large lab, and when my lab goes down, it takes some time to bring back up. So I also have this idea of I need to automate my lab as much as possible. And then to scratch that itch, as you can see, I'm huge into fitness. I'm always trying to push myself. So I push myself educationally as well. And in order to complete some more challenging Raspberry Pi projects that I wanted to, it really needed a level of Python skills that I didn't have, more than just putting text on screen or doing some mathematical equations. So my Python zero to hero story starts about 6 years ago. I keep calling it to zero to hero because that's the training I took. And you'll see this a lot with Python. There are many, if you just do a Google search of zero to hero, you'll see a bunch of Python ones. The one that I took was relatively good. I actually aced the Python certification practice test. I didn't take the test, it's $800 and it didn't really afford me anything for my career. But I felt pretty confident enough to go apply for a new security engineer role at a leading security vendor. Now, this was an extremely high paying role, 300K plus. So I went through multiple interviews, about 8 of them, and I thought this was going awesome. And they gave me a weekend project. Now we can argue about how complicated this is or how fair this is. They wanted me to automate the exploitation of a vulnerability using Python. Just a single vuln. And while I was relatively good with Python, I had never made an HTTP request or an API request using Python before. Everything that I had done was local. So, you know, parsing information or doing math or some of the more easy things I had gotten into, but never really communicated with a web page via code before. So as most would, I stressed the entire weekend and I failed miserably. I turned in some code that used a Nmap library and a Metasploit library and kind of cheated my way through exploitation. And of course, I didn't get a call back. And if that wasn't obvious, as I say here. At this point, I kind of pretty much gave up and chalked it up to, well, I'm not a dev. Honestly, if that was where the story ended, I wouldn't be here today. About 6 months after, I kind of got over my failure and decided, you know what, I'm going to take a different approach. And what I realized is that, at least for the way that I learn, and I think that a lot of people learn the same way, you learn better by doing. Or I like to put it another way, through failure. Failure is one of the best teachers, I think, that's out there. And so I needed a project. I wasn't able to just go learn Python in 40 hours and then be able to script anything at the drop of a hat. So I needed something to focus on to keep my Python skills sharp. Furthermore, I needed to broaden this exposure to built-in Python packages. Some of the things that was in my Zero to Hero training did not really afford me the skill set to all the built-in Python packages that are out there. So the first end-to-end project I did was an investment tracker. It looked at crypto investments and securities. And I don't really trust apps because I'm in security. So I just really wanted to find out what's the current cost of this security. And I would keep my data private and have how much I owned of that and what I paid for it, and show me the current level of my investment. And then timing. Timing just happened to be right at this juncture. So this is important to notate for those that are in your career. Sometimes timing is the best thing here. And right at this time, our cloud product was launched, and it launched with API-centric views. We wanted to integrate vulnerability data. It was a hot topic then. It's a hot topic now. And this had customers expecting examples and walkthroughs. And I didn't have the skills to give them this examples. And our Python resources were quite slim. So if I wanted to continue these sales, I really needed to fill this gap. So I took it upon myself rather than pushing it to another colleague. And I built Navi. And it's the Tenable.io Swiss Army knife. It's a command line interface to Tenable.io to speed up common tasks in vulnerability management. So what's underneath the hood? Well, it's written in Python 3 to hold the data and to do exports and everything, where I'm using a SQLite database, very light database, awesome, it's built into Python. Some of you who have used scripting, you've probably used argv. And argv is a great, probably the most common command line library for scripting. I decided to use Click because Click builds in a helper function for you. So as you build commands, it builds in a help screen for you, and it cuts down in the amount of code. There's a bunch of things that Click offers me that I haven't been using yet. I just haven't had to take the time to do it. One of the examples is auto finish. So just a tab complete. In Click, you can do it. It's a couple different lines of code. I just haven't actually implemented it. So if you are writing your own command lines, consider Click. It was life-changing for me. The request library, this is what is going to allow the API calls back and forth, right? So dealing with the HTTP calls that are required to get data back from web pages. We use Tenable, which is an unofficial SDK. It's written by one of my friends at Tenable. And this just makes the API calls to our cloud platform easier and puts less effort on the developer. Then I'm using some internal libraries, so CSV for CSV exports. It's crazy how easy it is to create a CSV off of data. Maybe 20 lines of code from start to end. So this is one of the awesome natures of Python. SendMail, this is really cool, not really big used feature, but you can mail yourself a report. Text wrap, for if you are printing stuff to the screen and you don't know how large the data set is, it's good to kind of use text wrap so it doesn't overflow into, well, just wrap around like you see on the calls. I'm using Pretty Print. If you've ever gotten JSON data back from a web page, it is just garbage. It doesn't look very nice. So Pretty Print is a really simplistic way to make the data look, well, pretty. And then last but not least, I have a Docker file in there, so you can run this all from Docker if you want. I get a couple questions from people of how many lines of code it is, usually from non-developers, because developers don't care about lines of code. But if you're interested, it's about 4,000 lines of code, 3 years and weekends and nights of this, and I'm at 6 versions. And so this started out as just a way to learn Python and has turned into a real product. And I have about 25 customers that are using it, and the top 10 are Fortune 50 companies, major companies. So it's kind of exciting for me, a novice who has large companies using a free tool. So how do I install Navi? There's 3 different ways. You can run it in Docker, do Docker pull, and then Docker run. And we are just opening up a bash command and jumping right into that Docker container. As soon as you exit, all your data is removed, and voila. The easiest way to install it, because obviously if you have to run it on Docker, you need to install Docker. You can run it from pip, and that's probably the easiest way. If you want the latest and greatest code, or want to, a lot of my customers will take my code and then make their own forks of it. You can use Git to do that. After you've gotten one of these 3 installation options, you have to use the Tenable.io key. That's going to allow you to get into Tenable.io and actually do some stuff. And then last but not least, before you can actually get up and running with Navi, you need to do a Navi update. This is going to take all the data from the cloud, all your asset data and all your vulnerability data, and put it into that SQLite database so that we can do some splunking. So before we get into the demo, some general capabilities, and I'll show you some of this. Automating scan creation and scan launching, or just scan control. User controls for create, delete, disable, enable. You can tag these kind of things on, so when someone leaves a company, disable them automatically. The whole, I've shifted in version 6 from more of like exploring your vulnerability data to making sure that every single command can be done in an automated fashion. You'll see I have one more to move over, and that's the scan one, where it actually prompts you. Now all the commands you can do from a single command. And we won't be able to show you all of what I created today, but there are over 100 commands and about 10 different CSV exports. So with that, I'm gonna stop sharing so I can share a different screen. And I'm going to now share my screen again. Now, before I get started, sometimes the screen doesn't show that awesome. So can everyone see the green text big enough?
Yep, I think we're good.
Yep.
Okay, I made it quite large so that you could see everything that we're doing today. Okay, so let's get running. We're going to first do a Navi update. Again, this is just to pull down my vulnerability data. It is right now scheduling a vulnerability report or export, pulling that data down, and then requesting an asset export and pulling it down. So that I have a really small container that took pretty quick. So the first challenges that when I sat down to solve, I used to do vulnerability management at a small company for PCI. And one of the questions that I got asked the most was, is there a scan running? And you can simply look to see if there's a scan running, and there's not right now. Now I'm going to get this this text overlay because I got everything blown up. So some things aren't going to look as pretty as I designed it, but we'll have to live with that. I just want to make sure you guys can see everything. And I'll show you this back when we kick on a scan to show it. The next thing that I created was what was the latest scan that ran? And so we can look at that by Navi scan latest. And so a couple things happen here, right? So as I go all the way to the top, I can see the latest scan details. This is scan 13, the vulnerability counts, a score, all the plugin information and all the vulnerabilities and how many I have, right? So we can get more into this as we mature the conversation here. But what we're going to do is create a scan from the command line. Now, this is common if you're a remediator. You just removed one of these vulnerabilities and you want to find out is that vulnerability removed. I can do remediation scans, but for today's simplicity, I'm just going to do a normal scan. So we're going to create a scan for a particular asset in my network. And we're going to pick the basic scan. And it's going to give me all my cloud scanners. So, or all my scanners, not just my cloud scanners. So we're going to pick, let's see, where is it? This one right here. All right, so now my scan is being created. Now you have full scan control here. So if you look under the scan option, at any time you want to look at an option, you can use --help and you can see the options. So what I can do here is say, let's look at the status of 4802. Oops. And it's still pending. So we'll give that a second as we look. What I want to show you is this is pending because we're going to look at the running command. One of the other challenges is as you're trying to build automation with using any API, you want to see the results of a returned API call. And so a lot of people use Postman or something like that. I kind of built in a Postman-like capability, very lightweight, just does a GET. So we can look at different endpoints. So API users, and you can see this is where the pretty print is using. So I'm just getting the raw JSON data from that endpoint. I could hit the scanners endpoint and see all the scanners that are available. I can hit the scans endpoint and get that as well. Now I've got a lot of this built in. So if we look at Navi Display, let's see a lot of the options here. We have tons of different options, right? So let's look at all the scans. You can see ones that are completed, and look at this one that's running, 4802. That's the one that we just created. So now we can go use that Navi Display running. Now that we have a scan that's running, and there we go. Now, if I wanted to stop that scan, and it's stopping. So complete control of your scans. Now, imagine automating this. So an event happens, kick off a scan for this IP address that was in that event. You can get more prescriptive to say, scan this particular plugin if you desire to. So let's look back at the latest scan. If I remember, it was scan 13. And so let's look at some options here in the scan, just to remind us. So another common thing that we hear from remediators is what hosts were found during that scan. And in the UI, it can be difficult to find this kind of stuff. So you can just do Navi scan hosts. What hosts were found in the last time scan 13 ran? So here's all the IP addresses, their critical, high, medium, and low vulnerabilities. And you got a good idea of what's there. If you wanted to see the details of the scan, so this is just the host, right? If I want to look at the details of a scan, I can find out all of the plugins that kicked off on all of the assets and what's my most popular vulnerability, right? Just certificates haven't been applied in my environment, right? So let's take a look at one of these assets that we had saw before. And we're going to dive in to specific vulnerability data that we have on this asset. So this is 15. Let's find out what this asset is. So there's a couple of things that we have here. We have the UUID. This is a unique identifier. If it's in a different network, I have what identities we know about. So this is called Bedpool. It is a operating system CentOS. Here's the IP addresses. We'd see more than one IP address if it had it. MAC address. We have tags, some vulnerability information, some exposure information, the last time it authenticated, and the last license scan date. So for a remediator, this stuff is really helpful. Now I put in here a little MAC address finder, which I think is cool. And we can go ahead and, let's see, look for that MAC. And we can see this is a VMware host, right? So I may be like, well, what kind of vulnerabilities are on this device, right? So let's go back up here and just look at the vulns. And so again, this doesn't print out as pretty as it would if the text wasn't as large, but I can see all the vulnerabilities that exist there. Let me just put that down a little bit. That's a little bit better. I'm sure you can still see it. So that's all the vulns. If I wanted to look for critical vulns, just do critical. And I structured this a little differently. I structured it to show me what the vuln was, the severity of it, and then what the package should be installed to show the outputs of the plugin, right? So this is a little bit different. The last one I'll show you in this kind of remediator talk track where we're looking at what specific vulnerabilities on the host are patches. You know, we hear this from some of our customers, just tell me what to fix. Well, we have a patch report that does that, right? Just tells you what to fix and then gives you more information about the last time the system was rebooted. So I want to show this last little thing for mail. Now, I built this and I thought this is really cool. So this is my personal email. I'm going to send me the output of this command. So we're just going to call this a patch report. And what I did is I put this little message capability in here. And we're going to use these little tick marks to eventually call this capability here. We're going to take the output of this command and I'm going to send it through email. Okay. And let's see it come through. I'll bring it over here on the other screen for you. And here we go. So it sent me the command. So this is quite nifty to be able to do. Yeah, I still use the word nifty, especially if you're a mediator. Send this off to someone who's going to actually do the work and you're off to the races. Now, there's one other thing that I kind of want to show you because it's an important part of remediation. So if you look at the vulns, one thing caught my eye, and you can't really see it here, but you can see on this, because I have the screen blown up so high, you see there's a port 80 open. A lot of these vulnerabilities are on port 8080. So as someone who's working in vulnerability management or in security, you need to be able to ask yourself questions about your environment. And you may come across this and say, wait a second, what is port 8080 doing open? And do I have it anywhere else, right? So that's where the find command comes in. I can just say find port 8080. And here's all the assets that have port 8080 open. But essentially, these are all the assets that have that port open. We can do this for any port, 443, 445, right? And there are going to be all the assets that we have found a vulnerability on or that it was open. So now what a customer or what a remediator may want to do is say, let's group those assets and then export those assets for remediation and say to someone, go fix these assets. So what we'll do is tag these assets, and we give it a category to say, you know, open ports, and we give it a value of the port that we're going to open. I'm just using demo so I can find it. And then we pick the port we're going to look at, right? Now this is going to tag all these assets with this tag. This takes a little bit to actually see, a little bit for the cloud to process. We can look at tags to see whether or not it worked. We've got demo. Oops. And it is done. So we will do a Navi update. Now, the reason why I need to do this is because I changed something in the cloud. So I need to pull that data back locally so that I could actually export this data. So let's look at the export options real quick. And so I have lots of different options. What we're going to be doing is let's cheat here. We're going to export the data by this tag. So export by tag, and we're going to use this to just those assets to pull vulnerability data. Now this is grabbing a bunch of different data, so it does take longer. It's hitting the data one by one, and we can do maybe head 2, and you can see it's difficult to see in this view, of course, but IP address, host name, all the stuff that you would want on your asset, and then the details that follow. So that is a quick run through of Navi. I saw some of the chats blowing up, so I don't know if there's some questions in here. While I look at the questions, you're more than welcome to fire questions away live.
I think that was just background chatter, Casey.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know how much time I have. I didn't want to, you know, wanted to be respectful of everyone's time. Let me jump real quick to finish off. If you don't have any questions on the demo, let me just share my screen and finish off some thoughts before I close the presentation here. So give me a second if you don't mind.
Casey?
Yes.
Samuel Sutton here, computer scientist, FBI. So I noticed one thing about your tool demo that I think would be absolutely fascinating if you haven't thought to do this for your folks already. Because sometimes during, I'll just say, intrusion investigations, it came down to, well, if that's what's going on, where are all the other machines on the network that are also communicating on the same evil port? Typically high numbered, unregistered, some bot control or some other evilness has gone up Periscope. Somebody finally did something to figure out what the port was. I saw right there that your tool would let somebody look over their network range and query by who else or where else is there a machine open on this port. Very handy dandy, fast and quick.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one of the many different use cases that I'm looking for is all this data exists inside of the UI. But we all know that clicking on the mouse and trying to navigate a UI isn't as quick as at your fingertips, and it's really difficult to automate a UI. So my whole project morphed from just learning Python into then making this really useful. So I have some very large customers who ask for some of these capabilities, be like, hey, how could you do X, Y, Z with that? And now my whole direction is actually driven through their feature requests. So as I said, this has made a huge career impact for me. It opened up new opportunities. I am now one of the go-to people for these integrations and for Python. And I've trained some of the SCs on Python. Again, I'm not a developer, but I know enough about Python to help others. And something I don't think we talk about enough inside of corporate environment is the importance of a personal brand. And I just like to highlight what you do, how you act, that carries from company to company, whether you like it or not. And then your media presence also carries with you, whether you like it or not. And doing projects like this, either putting something on GitHub or helping out, really does elevate your personal brand. And if you're someone who cares about that, this is another reason maybe to look at projects like learning Python. It also, like I said, it made me a better hacker. It made me better at my job, right? So now I can actually, there's some tasks that I can look at and be like, oh, I can automate that. Where before I couldn't even fathom automating something. I now have so much more at my fingertips. With a couple lines of code, you can do a lot. Python's relevant. So I get this from a lot of the people that I mentor is how relevant is Python in cyber? And really, it's really tough to answer because it really depends on what your role is. I'm seeing it more in cloud. Like if you really want to orchestrate the cloud, you need to start learning whether it's Python or Go or some kind of language to really make your cloud deployments powerful. Integrating security products are the future. The last 3 years, I've been at Tenable for 5 years. Last 3 years, this is a constant conversation. Where 3 years ago, it was 10% of customers would look for automation. Everyone's demanding automation. They're demanding an open API. They expect that you have an API and that it's easy to use. And when it's not, they're quite frustrated. So from my perspective, I see this as where the world is going. So if someone, and I tell this to people that I mentor, if you're not learning Python, you want to get into cyber, you're just making it that much harder. Not that you can't get into cyber without Python, you can. Most people do. Most of my colleagues don't know Python. But I would say that it's differentiating. And if you're someone that enjoys that challenge, Python can differentiate you from some of the others. And then last, why get a GitHub account? I'm seeing more hiring managers ask for this. And when I asked some others why they asked for it, the number one reason is it shows passion. It shows that we can't teach passion. And when we look at our cybersecurity people that do well in their career, it's primarily, not 100%, their passion that really drives them to success. And so if you really want to be differentiating in an interview, and you're going against 100 people, it's really cool to be the only one with a GitHub account and the only one with code that they're willing to share with somebody. There's one other thing on this. No one's going to read your code and make fun of it. I have that kind of thought process. Is like I'm so ignorant to Python. If I put code out there, someone's going to make fun of it. No, I can tell you no for sure. If you go, I still keep my old code on there. There's an original version of Navi. I used extremely poor coding skills. No one's thrown shade except for me. So I implore you to share your ideas, dip your toe into the GitHub account, and like Stephen Covey says, sharpen the saw. So just want to thank John and everyone for allowing me to come spend some time with you today. And thank you for the time.